The crystal chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 captured stars, bathing the ballroom in golden light. Expensive roses, imported from Holland that very morning, filled the air with their perfume. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits murmured and laughed politely, sipping champagne as a string quartet played softly near the stage. This was not just a wedding. It was an event, a union of power and wealth that the media had labeled the merger of the year. At the center of it all stood Alexander Kane, the CEO of Kane Enterprises, a man in his mid-30s whose reputation intimidated both rivals and employees alike. He wore his tailored black tuxedo like a suit of armor, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. To the outside world, he was the perfect groom, rich, successful, devastatingly handsome. But behind his cool exterior, a heaviness clung to him, one he carefully masked with the faintest of smiles. His bride-to-be, Vivienne Lockhart, glided down the aisle like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her wedding gown shimmered with diamonds stitched into the veil, each step measured, rehearsed, deliberate. Vivienne was beautiful, no doubt, but her beauty was cold, sharp, the kind that commanded admiration rather than affection. The daughter of a real estate tycoon, she was marrying Alexander not for love, but for power, though she had convinced herself the two were the same. The officiant raised his hand, asking for silence. The music faded, and all eyes turned toward the couple. "Dearly beloved," the man began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of—" Alexander's gaze drifted across the crowd, past the glittering jewels and polished smiles. For a fleeting second, he thought of the promises he once made long ago in a much simpler place. A woman's laughter echoed in his mind, soft, warm, genuine, so different from Vivienne's rehearsed smile. He blinked quickly, dismissing the memory. That was the past. This is my future. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Every angle of the ceremony was being captured for tomorrow's headlines. Alexander straightened his shoulders, reminding himself that his choices had brought him here. Vivienne slipped her hand into his, her fingers icy against his palm. "Don't look so grim," she whispered with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're about to marry the most envied woman in the city." Before he could respond, a soft commotion stirred at the back of the hall. At first, no one paid attention, perhaps a late guest, perhaps a clumsy waiter. But the sound grew louder, small footsteps pattering across marble, followed by the urgent voice of a child. "Wait, please, wait." Heads turned. Gasps fluttered across the room. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stood at the entrance clutching a worn teddy bear. Her dress was faded, her shoes scuffed, and yet she walked forward with a bravery that seemed too large for her small frame. 2 security guards rushed to intercept her, murmuring apologies to the crowd as they tried to gently escort her out. But the girl shook her head stubbornly, her big brown eyes glistening with tears. "I have to talk to him," she cried, pointing directly at Alexander. The music stopped, the officiant froze, guests exchanged bewildered glances. Alexander's chest tightened as the little girl's voice echoed in the silent hall. Something about her gaze, wide, determined, pleading, pierced through the fortress he had built around his heart. He didn't know who she was, but for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't look away. Vivienne's grip on his hand tightened like a vice. "What is this nonsense?" she hissed under her breath, her perfect smile cracking for the first time. "Security, remove her immediately." But the girl only grew louder, struggling against the guards as she cried, "Please, I have to tell him before it's too late." The room buzzed with whispers now, guests leaning toward one another, reporters snapping photographs furiously. And Alexander Kane, the man known for his unshakable composure, felt his pulse quicken. Something inside told him this moment, this child, would change everything. The wedding was about to stop before it had even begun. The air in the ballroom had shifted. The once smooth rhythm of the ceremony cracked under the weight of the child's voice. Guests twisted in their chairs, some with annoyance, others with curiosity, while photographers leaned forward, eager to capture a scandal unfolding in real time. The little girl stood trembling at the end of the aisle. Though her knees shook and her tiny fists clutched her teddy bear as if it were a shield, her eyes did not waver. They locked on Alexander with such intensity that the CEO himself felt his chest tighten. "Sir, should I escort her out?" One of the security guards asked quietly, glancing at Alexander for direction. Vivienne didn't wait for him to answer. "Of course you should," she snapped, her voice cutting like glass. "This is our wedding, not some charity shelter. Get her out before she embarrasses us further." The girl flinched but didn't retreat. She pulled against the guard's grip, her small voice rising above the gasps of the crowd. "Please, I'm not lying. I need to talk to him." Alexander finally raised his hand, a subtle gesture that carried the weight of authority. The guards hesitated, then released her. Murmurs rippled across the hall. The CEO was known for his decisiveness, but now he looked unsettled. The girl stumbled forward, the hem of her faded dress brushing against the pristine white aisle runner meant for the bride. Guests on either side recoiled slightly, some with pity, others with disdain. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair loosely tied with a fraying ribbon. She looked out of place among the diamonds and silk, yet her presence carried more weight than all the grandeur combined. She stopped halfway down the aisle, clutching her bear tighter. Her lower lip quivered, but she lifted her chin. "You don't know me," she began, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word, but I know you." Vivienne's face darkened. She forced a laugh, sharp and hollow. "This is absurd. Alexander, darling, don't let this child ruin what we've worked for. Someone planted her here, jealous competitors, no doubt." She turned to the audience, smiling bitterly. "You all know how desperate people can be when they envy success." But Alexander wasn't listening to her. His gaze remained locked on the little girl who seemed to be holding back tears. Something about her eyes tugged at him, an echo of familiarity he couldn't quite name. The officiant cleared his throat nervously, trying to regain order. "Perhaps we should." "No," the girl blurted, stepping forward. Her voice cracked, but she didn't falter. I have to say it now." Gasps swept through the guests. Every camera was trained on her now. Vivienne's smile faltered. Her grip on Alexander's arm grew so tight he nearly winced. "Enough," she hissed through clenched teeth. "I won't have this farce drag on another second." But before anyone could silence the child, she raised her tiny hand and pointed across the hall. Her finger didn't point at Alexander, nor at Vivienne. It pointed toward a woman standing quietly at the far corner of the ballroom, half hidden behind a column. The woman wore a plain dress, her hair tied back in a simple knot. Unlike the glittering guests, she carried no jewels, no designer labels. Her hands were rough, calloused from years of work. She had tried to blend into the background, to remain unseen. But now all eyes turned to her. The little girl's voice rang out, clear and piercing in the silence. "That's my mom." The world seemed to freeze. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. Vivienne's jaw dropped in outrage. Guests gasped so loudly it sounded like a single wave crashing across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes firing in rapid succession. The woman in the corner stiffened, her face paling. She hadn't expected to be revealed, not like this, not today. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to remain composed. The little girl clutched her teddy bear and stood her ground, her chest rising and falling with each rapid breath. Her declaration had shattered the perfection of the event, and there was no going back. Alexander Kane, for the first time in years, felt his carefully constructed world tilt dangerously out of balance. And somewhere deep down, a memory long buried began to stir. The grand ballroom fell into stunned silence. The echo of the little girl's cry, "That's my mom," still hung in the air, trembling against the glittering chandeliers. It was as though time itself had frozen. Alexander's eyes followed the trembling finger that pointed toward the modest woman at the back of the room. For a moment, he didn't believe it. He couldn't. His chest rose and fell heavily, his heart thudding louder than the muffled gasps around him. The woman's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as if she had been caught in a secret she never meant to reveal. She stood rooted in place, gripping the strap of her worn handbag with both hands, her knuckles white. Vivienne was the first to break the silence. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, though it sounded more like a scream strangled in her throat. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "Who let these people in here? Alexander, call security at once. This is a wedding, not some street performance." But the crowd wasn't convinced. Whispers surged like wildfire. "Did she say Mom? Is the CEO connected to them? Who is that woman?" Flashes from reporters' cameras blinded the scene. Scandal had just walked into the perfect wedding, and they would feast on it. The little girl, shaking but defiant, yanked free from the hesitant guards and dashed down the aisle. She stopped only a few steps away from Alexander, her small frame dwarfed by the towering groom. She looked up at him with wide, tear-brimmed eyes that seemed to pierce through his very soul. "My mom," she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking. "She's over there. She knows you. Please, you have to listen." Alexander's throat tightened. Something about those eyes, something achingly familiar in the curve of her face, the trembling of her lip. Vivienne pulled on his arm. "Don't listen to this nonsense. She's clearly been sent here to ruin us. Look at her clothes, Alexander. She's nothing. A child from the slums, desperate for attention. Throw her out before she humiliates us further." But Alexander didn't move. His gaze was locked on the woman in the corner. Her eyes, he remembered them. He had seen them years ago, filled with laughter, filled with trust. They were eyes that once looked at him not as a CEO, not as a powerful man, but simply as a man who was loved. The officiant shuffled his papers nervously. "Mr. Kane, perhaps we should pause." "No," the word slipped from Alexander's lips before he could think. His voice, low and firm, silenced the officiant and the crowd alike. Gasps followed. All eyes now darted between the CEO, the little girl, and the mysterious woman. Vivienne's perfectly composed mask cracked. "Alexander," she hissed through clenched teeth, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare give them a second more of your time. This wedding is about us, me. Don't let some nobody interrupt." But it was too late. The woman in the corner finally moved. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each sound magnified in the silence. With every step, her composure seemed to waver, her body trembling as if the weight of the entire room pressed against her shoulders. The little girl turned, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, relief breaking through her fear. The woman knelt beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her protectively. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting Alexander's for the first time in years. Recognition struck like lightning. His breath caught. Her face, though thinner and worn by hardship, was one he could never forget. Memories came rushing back, stolen moments under the stars, laughter in hidden corners, a kiss he once swore would bind them forever. "Evelyn," his voice cracked, her name falling from his lips like a confession. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests whispered frantically, cameras flashed faster, and Vivienne's face drained of color. Evelyn lowered her gaze, ashamed, but her daughter clung tighter to her. The girl's voice, small but strong, carried across the hall. "She's my mom, and you're my dad." The words dropped like a stone into still water, rippling through every corner of the grand hall. Alexander staggered back, his eyes widening, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. The wedding had stopped, and nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the ballroom had become suffocating. No music played, no officiant spoke, no one dared to move. The whispers had dulled into a heavy silence, as though every guest held their breath, waiting for someone to break the tension. Evelyn rose slowly from where she had knelt beside her daughter. Though her plain dress and tired features made her seem out of place in the glittering hall, her presence commanded attention. She straightened her back, though her trembling hands betrayed the storm inside her. Vivienne's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. "This is a joke," she snapped. "Alexander, tell them you don't know this woman, tell them this is some stunt." But Alexander couldn't. His throat closed as Evelyn's eyes lifted to meet his. In that gaze, he saw not a stranger but the ghost of a past he had buried, a past he had tried to erase with ambition, wealth, and power. Alexander, Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. I never wanted it to happen like this. I didn't want to come here, but she looked down at her daughter who was clutching her tightly. She insisted. Gasps rippled again through the crowd. Alexander's mind spun. Her daughter, my daughter, the words of the child still echoed, you're my dad. Vivienne laughed bitterly, her composure cracking. Oh, how convenient. Every rich man's nightmare, a woman crawling out of the shadows with a child and a story. Do you expect us to believe this nonsense? Evelyn didn't flinch. She gently brushed her daughter's hair back and pulled something from her small purse, a locket. She held it out with trembling fingers. This belonged to you, Alexander. You gave it to me the night before I left. I swore I'd never lose it. Alexander's eyes widened. He knew the locket instantly, a simple silver piece, engraved with his mother's initials. He had given it to Evelyn years ago, back when they were young and reckless, when love had meant more than empire building. Flashbacks swirled in his mind. Evelyn laughing as she danced barefoot in the rain. Whispered promises in the servants' quarters, away from judging eyes. His father's cold, furious voice when he discovered their secret. He remembered how he had let Evelyn go, pressured by his family, afraid of losing his inheritance and his future. She had left, heartbroken, carrying more than he realized. I raised her alone, Evelyn whispered now, her voice cracking. I worked as a maid, a cleaner, anything to feed her. She grew up without knowing the man who gave her life. I told her stories about him, but she wanted more. She wanted the truth. The little girl looked up at him then, her eyes shining with tears. I wanted to meet you. I wanted you to know me. Alexander's chest heaved. His carefully guarded heart threatened to shatter. This child, his child, stood before him, living proof of the love he had abandoned. Vivienne exploded, unable to control her rage. This is absurd. Alexander, can't you see what's happening? She's manipulating you. Do you think it's a coincidence she shows up on your wedding day? This, she gestured wildly toward Evelyn and the girl, this is a scam. But her voice only exposed the venom she had long hidden beneath her polished exterior. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some shook their heads, others whispered with pity. The image of the perfect bride was unraveling thread by thread. Alexander stepped forward, his eyes locked on Evelyn. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me? Evelyn's lips trembled. I tried. Years ago I wrote letters, but none were answered. I thought maybe you didn't care, maybe you'd moved on, and I didn't want her growing up feeling unwanted. His fists clenched at his sides. He thought of his father again, a ruthless man who had controlled every aspect of his life. Could it be? Had those letters been hidden, destroyed? The possibility tore at him. Vivienne's voice shrieked across the room. Alexander, this is madness. If you acknowledge them, you throw away everything, the merger, the fortune, the life we've built. The girl pressed her face against her mother's side, frightened but brave. Evelyn bent down, whispering gently, It's all right, sweetheart, you've done enough. But Alexander shook his head slowly. No, he said, his voice firmer now. His gaze lingered on the child, then on Evelyn. She deserves to be heard, they both do. The ballroom was in chaos, half the guests appalled, the other half captivated. The officiant looked helpless, the staff unsure whether to escort the intruders out or continue the ceremony. But one thing was certain, the wedding was no longer in Alexander's control. His past, his choices, and his secrets had all come crashing into his present. And for the first time in years, he was forced to confront the man he had become. The once celebratory ballroom now pulsed with chaos. Guests leaned in, whispering furiously, their jeweled necklaces catching the light of the chandeliers as they turned to one another, hungry for every detail. Some hid their shock behind polite masks, but most stared openly, devouring the scandal as it unfolded. Vivienne Lockhart was unraveling. Her carefully curated image of grace and control slipped with every passing second. Her voice rose, shrill and desperate. This is outrageous, she cried, pointing at Evelyn as though she were filth. Do not believe a word this woman says. She's a fraud, a parasite, crawling back here because she smells money. Her words cut like whips, drawing gasps from a few of the more sympathetic guests. Evelyn flinched, clutching her daughter protectively against her chest. The child's small fingers tightened around her mother's dress as she buried her face, trembling. Alexander's jaw clenched. "Enough, Vivienne!" His voice was low, but it carried across the ballroom, silencing many of the whispers. But Vivienne only grew louder, her desperation fanning into fury. "No, it's not enough. Do you have any idea what she's doing? She's humiliating us. She's humiliating you. After everything you've built, after everything we've planned." Her words choked off when Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Evelyn. The room seemed to tilt, all eyes fixed on his every move. He looked down at the little girl clinging to her mother's side, her cheeks streaked with tears, her teddy bear held like a shield. His chest tightened again, the same pull, the same inexplicable recognition. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, his eyes locked on Evelyn S. "Is she?" Evelyn's throat bobbed as she tried to swallow back the lump forming there. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. She nodded once slowly, her voice barely audible. "Yes, she's yours, Alexander. She always has been." The words detonated inside him. Gasps echoed like cannon fire through the hall. Vivienne let out a strangled scream. "Lies, all lies!" She stormed forward, snatching the locket from Evelyn's trembling hand and holding it high like a weapon. "This means nothing. Anyone can forge a trinket. Where's your proof, Evelyn? Where's your proof that this child is his?" The little girl stepped forward then, her small body shaking but her voice clear. "I have proof." The crowd hushed instantly. From the pocket of her faded dress, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she handed it to Alexander. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the faded ink. His breath caught. It was a letter, his letter. "Evelyn, I don't care what anyone says. You are my choice. You are my heart. If the world turns against us, I'll still be yours, always, Alexander." The signature was unmistakable. His own hand. His own words written years ago when love had felt unstoppable. His knees nearly buckled as the weight of the moment struck him. Vivienne lunged for the paper, but Alexander pulled it away, his eyes blazing. "Enough, Vivienne." The guests gasped again, shocked at his tone. Vivienne froze, humiliated, her chest heaving as her perfect image shattered. "You're going to throw all of this away?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "For what? For a child you never even knew existed, for a maid who abandoned you." Evelyn's voice broke as she spoke. "I never abandoned him. I was pushed away. Your family, your father." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is her. She deserves to know who she is. She deserves to know her father." The little girl's voice cracked as she looked up at Alexander. "I just wanted you to see me, just once." Her words struck him harder than any accusation could. He felt something inside him collapse, the cold fortress of ambition and duty he had built for years crumbling under the innocent plea of a child. Vivienne's rage flared again. She turned to the crowd, her voice desperate, shrieking. "You all see what this is, a pathetic sob story meant to destroy everything Alexander has worked for. Don't you see? She's nothing, she's dirt, and so is her brat." The room gasped. Even the most judgmental of guests recoiled. The venom in Vivienne's words had crossed a line. Alexander's voice boomed then, strong and unyielding. "Do not speak about them that way." The crowd went silent. Even Vivienne's fury seemed to falter at the steel in his voice. For a long moment, Alexander looked at Evelyn and the girl, their worn clothes, their trembling hands, their unyielding courage. Then he looked down at the letter again, the piece of his heart he had long forgotten. Vivienne hissed, her last defense crumbling. "If you walk away now, Alexander, you lose everything, the deal, the fortune, me." Alexander's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but maybe I've already lost too much." The little girl's hand slipped into his then, small and trembling but real. His fingers closed around hers instinctively. The ballroom gasped once more. For the first time in years, Alexander Kane chose something not for power, not for wealth, but for love. And Vivienne realized she had lost. The ballroom had become a battlefield. Glittering gowns and tailored suits were reduced to a trembling audience, caught between gasps and whispers, their eyes darting from Alexander to Evelyn, from Vivienne's fury to the small girl clutching her father's hand. Vivienne's world was crumbling. The diamond-studded mask she had so carefully worn for years had cracked into pieces. Her lips trembled with rage as she circled, her voice pitched high, almost hysterical. "You think you can come in here," she spat at Evelyn, "in rags, dragging that child along like some weapon and steal my life, my wedding, my future." Evelyn's tears glistened, but her voice was steady, fragile, yet unbroken. "I didn't come to steal anything. I came because she deserves the truth." Alexander tightened his grip on the girl's tiny hand. The guests noticed, every pair of eyes in the room locked onto that single gesture, that silent choice. Vivienne saw it too. She nearly choked on her fury. "Don't you dare," she screamed. "Don't you dare replace me with her. I've stood by you, Alexander. I've defended you. I've planned everything to perfection, us. And you'd throw it all away for a maid and a child that shouldn't even exist." The words hung in the air like poison. Evelyn flinched, and the little girl's lip trembled, her wide eyes shimmering with hurt. "Stop," Alexander said firmly. His voice cut through Vivienne's madness like a blade. But Vivienne didn't stop. She lunged toward Evelyn, her manicured hand raised as though to strike. Gasps erupted. Evelyn instinctively shielded her daughter, bracing. Alexander moved faster than anyone thought possible. He caught Vivienne's wrist midair, his grip iron, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't you ever touch them." The ballroom froze. The message was clear, the war was over. Vivienne's eyes widened in shock, tears burning at the edges. "You can't do this to me," she whispered hoarsely. "You owe me." But before she could finish, a weak whimper rose from below. The little girl swayed on her feet, her hands slipping from Alexander's. Her face paled, her body trembling. Then, before anyone could react, she collapsed. "No," Evelyn screamed, falling to her knees beside her daughter. Panic tore through her voice. "Baby, stay with me." Chaos erupted. Guests surged forward, some shouting for a doctor, others frozen in horror. Alexander dropped beside them, his expensive suit forgotten as he lifted the girl gently into his arms. Her small body felt frighteningly limp. His chest tightened with a fear he hadn't known since childhood, raw, unshakable terror. "Get the doctor," he barked. His voice thundered through the room, commanding absolute obedience. Several guests rushed toward the doors. Evelyn clutched her daughter's hand, sobbing. "She hasn't eaten, she's been so weak. I thought we could make it through tonight. I didn't know." Her voice broke completely. Alexander's throat ached as he looked down at the fragile girl in his arms. Her small lips moved faintly, whispering something. He bent close, desperate to catch it. "Don't let her take you." His heart shattered. "SHH, you're safe," he whispered, his voice trembling despite himself. "I won't let anyone take me away from you, not now, not ever." The guests fell silent, watching the titan of steel and fortune kneel in desperation, his mask stripped away by the fragile honesty of a child's love. Vivienne stood frozen, her face drained of color. Her empire of lies and ambition had slipped through her fingers. With every sob from Evelyn, with every tear sliding down Alexander's face, her power disintegrated. The doors burst open, the family doctor hurried in, briefcase in hand. He knelt beside them, checking the girl's pulse, her breathing, her frail body. After a tense silence, he looked up. "She's weak from exhaustion, hunger, and stress. She needs rest, nourishment, and care. Immediately." Relief swept through Evelyn, though tears still streaked her face. She brushed her daughter's hair back, whispering promises. Alexander stood, still holding the girl close to his chest, as though letting go would mean losing her forever. He turned, his gaze locking onto Vivienne. "This wedding is over." Gasps tore through the crowd. Vivienne staggered backward as though struck. "You can't mean that." "I mean every word," Alexander said coldly. "I don't want a future built on lies, cruelty, and ambition at any cost. I've made mistakes, but he looked at the girl in his arms, is not one of them." Vivienne's scream echoed as she lunged forward again, but this time, security intercepted her. The guests whispered furiously, some scandalized, others silently approving. Alexander didn't spare her another glance. He walked out of the glittering ballroom, Evelyn at his side, their daughter safe in his arms. For the first time in years, he felt the crushing weight of expectations lift, replaced with something terrifying but infinitely more precious. Responsibility, love, family. The night that was supposed to bind him to a loveless empire had instead given him back his heart. And the world would never be the same. The city lights shimmered outside Alexander's penthouse windows, but inside the mood was hushed and heavy. Doctors and nurses moved quietly through the room, tending to the fragile little girl resting in bed. Evelyn sat close, her hands gently stroking her daughter's hair, whispering soft reassurances even though the child was asleep. Alexander stood by the window, his back straight but his shoulders burdened. He had faced ruthless board members, crushing negotiations, hostile takeovers. But tonight, this battle had broken through the walls he'd built for years. When the doctor finally emerged from the room, Alexander turned swiftly. "She'll be all right," the physician said, adjusting his glasses. "What she needs most is time, rest, and proper care. She's been under immense stress, but she'll recover." Relief washed through Evelyn, tears brimming in her eyes as she mouthed a quiet thank you. Alexander exhaled slowly, but relief was not enough. He knew he had to speak, to confront what had been festering for years. When the doctor left, the silence between him and Evelyn stretched. Finally, Alexander crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair beside her. For a long moment, he simply looked at the child's sleeping face. So small, yet she had carried the weight of truths adults had been too cowardly to face. "She's mine, isn't she?" His voice was rough, stripped of all pride. Evelyn's lips trembled. She nodded. "Yes, I tried to raise her quietly away from your world, your shadows. I didn't want her used, judged, or hurt. But when she asked me about you, when she begged to see you, I couldn't keep her away anymore." Alexander closed his eyes, guilt crushing him. "All these years, you carried this burden alone." "I carried her," Evelyn said softly. "She was never a burden, but the secret that was." He reached forward almost hesitantly and brushed the child's tiny hand with his finger. She stirred but did not wake. A lump rose in his throat. "I don't deserve her," he whispered. Evelyn's gaze softened, though sorrow still lingered. "Maybe not, but she deserves you. The real you, not the man trapped in Vivienne's world, not the cold CEO who buried his heart. She deserves a father who will fight for her the way she's already fought for you." Alexander swallowed hard, his decision crystallizing at last. He straightened, his jaw firm. "Then that's what she'll have, starting tonight." The next morning, the city awoke to scandal. Headlines screamed. Billionaire walks out of his own wedding, leaves fiancée at the altar. Photos of Vivienne's tear-streaked fury circulated everywhere. The media speculated, board members gossiped, but Alexander remained silent. For once, he didn't care about reputation, empire, or power plays. Vivienne, on the other hand, raged publicly. She demanded explanations, accused Evelyn of manipulation, threatened lawsuits. But her words fell on deaf ears. The world saw her desperation for what it was, greed laid bare. Investors withdrew quietly. Society whispered that Alexander had chosen something real. Inside the penthouse, the storm outside seemed far away. Alexander spent his mornings beside his daughter, reading to her, listening to her soft laughter return little by little. Every smile she gave him felt like a second chance. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, she sat propped up on pillows, sketching with crayons. She looked up at him suddenly, eyes wide and innocent. "Are you really my daddy?" The question shattered him. His chest tightened as he crouched beside her bed. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. I'm your daddy, and I'm never leaving again. She studied him for a moment, as though deciding whether to believe. Then, slowly, she smiled and reached out, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I knew it. Tears burned his eyes as he held her close. Evelyn, watching from across the room, pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her sob. Weeks later, the ballroom that had once witnessed humiliation was rented again, but this time not for a wedding of grandeur. This time the gathering was small, intimate, filled only with those who mattered. No glittering chandeliers, no paparazzi, no society vultures, just truth. Evelyn stood nervously in a simple white dress, elegant yet unpretentious. The little girl clutched a basket of flowers, proudly scattering petals with a grin. Alexander wore no mask this time. As he took Evelyn's hands in his, he spoke words he never thought himself capable of. I built empires, but they were empty without you. Tonight I don't promise fortune or power. I promise something rarer, love, honesty, and a family. Forever. Evelyn's tears flowed freely, her reply trembling but sure. I don't need a billionaire. I just need the man who knelt for his daughter, the man who chose love when the world expected pride. That's enough for me. Their daughter squealed with delight as they kissed, tugging at their joined hands to pull them closer. The guests laughed warmly, clapping, but the sound that mattered most was the child's laughter, free, innocent, safe. Later that night, when the celebration had ended and the city was quiet, Alexander stood on the balcony with Evelyn at his side. Their daughter slept peacefully inside, curled against a soft blanket. You know, Evelyn murmured, leaning into him, this wasn't the life I ever imagined. It was harder, lonelier. But tonight I finally feel like it was worth it. Alexander pressed a kiss to her forehead. Tonight is just the beginning. I spent years chasing everything that didn't matter. But now, he looked back into the room where their child slept soundly. Now I've found what does. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt something stronger than power. Something no empire could buy, peace.